The new Legend of Zelda game is out, and I cannot wait to explore some dungeons and some floating islands. And I was thinking, I've drawn a ton of dungeon maps on this channel, but I've never drawn a floating island fantasy map, so why not give it a shot? Now I hope you join in with me and draw your own floating island map. And I should start things off by saying that the tools you use to draw your own map super don't matter. Use whatever you have on hand. But I am going to be using some Bristol board, just a regular old mechanical pencil, a white vinyl eraser, some Pigma micron pens in a few different sizes, like size 05 to a 12, and some Copic markers to add color. Now, because I've never actually drawn floating islands before, I've grabbed a scrap sheet of paper and I'm just gonna play around a little bit and try and figure out how to draw these things. I'm using one of my micron pens to sketch around. I'm not being precise or precious with these drawings at all. These are just tests to get an idea of how I'll be making the final drawings later in this process. And I don't think you have to be an expert artist to make a map like I'm going to make in this video. I do think you just have to be willing to play around and experiment a little bit. So yeah, this process took me just a couple minutes, and now I figured out how I'm gonna draw these floating islands. Gonna keep it really simple and clean looking, and it's gonna look awesome. And here, let me show you my thought process. So I want the outline of my floating island to be the most bold part, so I'm starting with a thicker pen, and I'm just drawing this sort of blobby outline of the top of the island. And I think it's really nice when the shape sort of winds back in on itself. That's gonna help create some depth later on in the drawing. So now for the rocky under part of this floating island. I'm making rough sort of wavy lines coming down from the top plane, and I'm starting from the edges and anywhere the initial outline sort of curves back in on itself. I'm treating my islands like they've lifted up out of the ground, so the rocky underparts get smaller and come to a point down at the bottom. You can kind of think of it like an upside down mountain. Next, I'll switch to a thinner pen and add some details, just a few wavy vertical lines to give it a jagged rock look. I like to use the thicker outline as a sort of guide. Anywhere it curves or bends, I put a line, but I'm being careful not to get too crazy with it. I want to keep it simple and clean. You don't need too many lines. So now I've shown you how to draw a single floating island. Let's move on to an actual map where I pull everything together. You know what, before I get into drawing this map, I want to say it's good to practice drawing a few of these floating islands on a separate sheet of paper first. While in the end, technically we are making really simple drawings, because these are sort of changeable, organic shapes. It does take a little bit of practice just to get the hang of it, but I'm talking like just a couple minutes on a scrap sheet of paper. Just trust me, if this is your first time drawing this kind of map, just practice a few times first. You'll thank me later. Okay, let's jump in and make an actual floating island map. So I've cut out a little 5x7 piece of Bristol board, and I'm just sketching right on top with a pencil. This is gonna be kind of a small map, but I'm thinking 5 islands up in the clouds. I'm connecting them with simple rope bridges and loosely sketching in some details like mountains and forests and a waterfall and a city. I'm being really loose with this sketch, but you might find that it's helpful to be a little tighter and more refined with your pencil. I like to start with these loose shapes and then get more detailed as I go. There's no pressure while drawing in pencil because you can always erase it. It's nice to just be sure and proud of the drawing before jumping in with ink pens. Now I should also say, if you're wondering how the heck do you draw all of these other elements that I'm adding to this map, I've got a bunch of other videos on the channel that tell you how to draw different fantasy terrain. And I've even made a step-by-step guide called Flick Silverpen's Guide to Making Maps. It shows you how to draw mountains and forests, towns, most everything you would need to make a fantasy world map. And the cool thing about this guide is that you don't have to have any drawing ability at all to make a cool looking map. Honestly, if you can draw these simple shapes, you can make a map that looks just like this, and definitely one that looks exactly like the one I'm drawing in this video. So yeah, check out the Making Maps guidebook. It's in my online shop along with a bunch of other guidebooks and tabletop role-playing game adventures. I'm super proud of this one, and I think if you're interested in drawing fantasy maps, this is a great place to get started. All right, now I'm ready to move on to inking this map. Just like the example island earlier, I'm starting with the outer edges and I'm using the thickest pen. I'm keeping in mind the whole upside down mountain thing and following the outline of the sketched floating island shape. And the cool thing about these floating islands and this earthen rocky underneath bit is that you don't have to be too tight and careful with these lines. They can be a little wobbly and still look like earth that's risen up into the air. So using the slightly thinner pen, I'm adding the extra vertical lines, and I think this just creates a ton of depth without much work. And again, I'm using the shape of the top of the island to sort of dictate where I'm adding these detailed lines in. And every once in a while, I'm breaking them up and not connecting them from top to bottom just to give it that rocky, organic look. Next up is rope bridges. These are really easy to draw, just 2 parallel lines with some evenly spaced diagonal dashes in there. I figure islands that are floating around the sky need rope bridges and not stone bridges. And yeah, the mountains are really easy too. They're just like A shapes and then pulling down a couple of lines to give some simple texture and depth. In fact, all of the icons on this map are super easy to draw. If you've practiced and figured out the floating island bit, you'll have no problem drawing a bunch of these little circle trees to make an entire forest. And you know, the city is just a bunch of boxes with dots for windows. Some of the boxes have triangles on top to make towers, and just by overlapping and stacking them, it makes it look like the city goes back into the distance. Really simple stuff. Now, I could be done with the drawing here, but I'm going to erase the pencils and add a little bit of color to this map. So I'm going to be using Copic markers, but like I said at the beginning, tools really don't matter. You can make a map just in pencil, just in pen, or you can use crayons or colored pencils or paint, whatever you feel like using. The important thing is the map that you're drawing and the world you're creating, not what tools you make it with. But at the same time, it is fun to play around with new tools. I'm trying to add in a little bit of shading to the bottom parts of these floating islands, just to bring a little bit of attention to, like the main focus of this map. But I'm not getting too crazy with it. I'm just using 2 markers, nothing fancy, just having fun drawing, and I'm still trying to get a feel for how these Copic markers work. And all of this to say is that I really hope you try out making your own floating island map. It's really not difficult, and I just think it's so amazing how a simple drawing like this can become a window into an entire fantasy world. I'm sitting here drawing this map, imagining this golden city floating up above the clouds. This place is obviously magic, because how can a landscape that is above the clouds have rain that creates waterfalls that are constantly flowing down? I don't know. I just think it's so fun coming up with these little worlds. What's going on in this cave on the 3rd floating island? Who lives in the tower in the 2nd island? I just love this stuff. Let me know what you think of the map down in the comments. Grab a Flick Silverbin's guide to making maps from my online shop, along with a bunch of other guides. If you'd like to support the channel, I have a Patreon where I make these guidebooks every month. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. See ya!